Regulatory Research Career Awards. For those of you who may have not be that familiar with the program, I'm going to give a very brief overview. I wanted to make sure we have plenty of time at the end of the session for questions and answers, but just to give a little bit of background for those of you who are new to tobacco regulatory science. This program emerged as a result of a partnership between FDA's Center for Tobacco Products and NIH. The mission really is to support research-based to help inform FDA regulatory decision-making over tobacco products. So NIH has oversight responsibility for this initiative, which involves multiple NIH institutes. And we are, responsible for things like today's pre-application webinar, the issuance of funding opportunities, grantee meetings, and a variety of other activities involved with the program. I do always like to mention, however, that this represents an addition to NIH tobacco research. As many of you know, NIH has a long history of funding tobacco control, and we don't want to get the impression that this is the only game in town. So while it's very important for you to consider your research questions and your research goals in terms of whether you want to pursue tobacco regulatory science, you shouldn't think that if they don't quite fit, that that's the end of your opportunities, because there's still plenty of opportunity through the NIH. If you haven't visited our website, I encourage you to do so. We do provide on the website all of the grants with any grant mechanism that has been funded through this program. It's a good way for you to familiarize yourself with the type of research that is being supported. So for today's agenda, we'll be getting a brief overview of the Center for Tobacco Products, FDA, from Amy Beatty. We'll then move into the nuances of these grant mechanisms from Michelle Rankin at NIDA. We'll then hear from Wei-Jia Ni, who is the SRO at the Center for Scientific Review, and Buckheimer, who is a grants management specialist at NIDA and can answer budgetary types of questions. But largely the presentations will be relatively short, and we hope to have much opportunity to answer your questions. Also, if you have colleagues who were unable to make it today, we do plan to post the recording of this webinar and the slides, so they will be available to anyone who's interested. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy Beatty from the Center for Tobacco Products.
All right, so good day, everyone. As Helen said, my name is Amy Beatty, and I'm here to talk about research to inform FDA regulatory actions. And I have to say that the disclaimer that this is not a formal dissemination of information by FDA and is not considered to represent agency policy. So a little bit of background about the TCA, or Tobacco Control Act. So since 2009, CTP has had the authority to regulate tobacco products intended for human consumption to reduce harm across the population. So we initially regulated the manufacturing, marketing, and distribution of cigarette tobacco, roll your own, and smokeless tobacco. But in 2016, the deeming rule was finalized, which expanded our rule our authorities over to all tobacco products, and you can see those listed here. So CTP is different from the other centers at FDA because we cannot regulate tobacco with FDA's traditional safe and effectiveness standards. Instead, we regulate tobacco based on the population health model, and regulatory actions are based on the risks and benefits to the population as a whole, and that includes both users of tobacco products and non-users. So FDA regulatory actions are informed by tobacco regulatory science, and that's where you all as researchers come in. So what is tobacco regulatory science? Tobacco regulatory science involves the application of the best available science to specific regulatory questions. Tobacco regulatory research translates general scientific knowledge into the specific scientific findings which serve as actionable information for regulatory decisions and actions. And to do this, tobacco regulatory science evaluates distinct situations to determine the effects on public health. So some select CTP regulatory activities, I'll go through them and give examples of research that might be specific to them. And so I'll review these 4 buckets: product standards, product review, compliance and enforcement, and number 4, public education. So first, product standards. Product standards is a regulatory action that we, through rulemaking, the Tobacco Control Act allows for the adoption of tobacco product standards appropriate to the protection of public health. And examples of potential product standard include nicotine yield, provisions for testing or measuring product characteristics, and the form and content of labeling for the proper use of tobacco products. And there are many others. So when we're thinking about product standards, we think about these statutory questions. Is the product standard appropriate for the protection of public health, considering these 3 areas? The risk and benefits to the population as a whole, so that public health model that we talked about previously, the increased or decreased likelihood that existing users of tobacco products will stop using such products, and the increased or decreased likelihood that those who do not use tobacco products will start using such a product. Other potential questions that you might want to think about when creating your research plan would be, does a specific marketed tobacco product meet such a standard that you have imagined? And to answer this question, the standard should be justifiable, appropriate, unambiguous, and also be measurable. So product standard research should be specific, be directed relevant to the situation, and could measure alternatives above and beyond the standards. Product review is the second bucket of regulatory activities that we'll talk about today. And these include investigational tobacco products, or ITPs, new product review, substantial equivalence, which we often refer to as SE, products that might be exempted from SE, and then modified risk tobacco products, or MRTPs. Applicants must provide adequate evidence for FDA to make a finding. So the applicant in this case is the tobacco industry applying for their product to be reviewed. FDA uses scientific research to evaluate the evidence provided by the applicant, and that's where you all come in as NIH researchers. So some possible product review statutory questions that we might ask. So for PMTAs, is the marketing of a new product appropriate for the protection of public health? For substantial equivalence, we ask, do differences between a new product and a predicate product raise different questions of public health? And then when we're looking at MRTPs, will the product as is actually be used by consumers to significantly reduce the harm and risk of tobacco-related disease to an individual tobacco user? And will it also benefit the health of the population as a whole. So product review research falls into many different categories. And so we look at, in the first column, information, materials, ingredients, design, composition, all of these of the specific tobacco products. We then look at the public health impact, the appeal, addictiveness, toxicity, initiation, if it increases initiation, decreases initiation, and as well as its impact on the cessation. The third bucket is compliance and enforcement. I'm going to give a brief overview of what that is and some examples of it. So compliance and enforcement is FDA is responsible for implementing and enforcing the provisions of the Tobacco Control Act and regulations that restrict the manufacturing, sale, and distribution and marketing of the tobacco products. FDA monitors for industry compliance through surveillance, site inspections, and investigations of tobacco product retailers, distributors, importers, and manufacturers. And then if we find violations or if FDA finds violations, we use enforcement actions against that retailer or manufacturer. So examples of a compliance would be adulterated product. And among other things, an adulterated product is if it has an added poisonous substance that renders the product injurious to health, if it doesn't have a marketing order if required, if it doesn't meet the tobacco product manufacturing practices if required, and it's a violation of a modified risk claim restriction. Another example of a potential compliance violation is misbranded products. And a product is considered misbranded if it has false or misleading labeling or advertising, it's missing required information on labeling, if it was manufactured in an establishment not in compliance with our registration requirements, and it doesn't bear labeling required by product standards. And there's a few others listed there. Compliance research might fall if you provided some data that supported compliance actions that are strongest, or if they're strongest to the specific case. So this again gets back to previously said about product review research. If it's very specific, it's helpful. Generalized research, though, can also be helpful and can supplement evidence collected during surveillance, inspections, and investigations to enable the FDA to determine whether there's a violation of the law. The fourth bucket that we'll talk about today is public education. And FDA maximizes its impact on public health by focusing on public education efforts to at-risk audiences. And currently, the three campaigns that are listed below, four active campaigns listed are highlighted below. They're targeting multicultural youth, rural youth, and LGBT young adults. So public education research can help identify misrepresentations or misperceptions, among users and non-users of tobacco products, demonstrate new approaches to communicate which would promote greater public understanding of the risks associated with the use of tobacco products, help understand the messages that can be used to reach vulnerable groups, help guide the creation of messages that resonate with the audience and promote behavior change. And it might also show how information can be provided in a format that is understandable and not misleading to a layperson. So you all might refer to the specific RFAs, and outline them are 7 areas of focus that we would like to see applications come in under, and those are toxicity, addiction, health effects, behavior, communication, marketing influences, impact analysis. The RFAs provide more details on potential priorities in each of those areas and give a description. We'd also like to note that there are some things that, although they fall under CTP regulatory authority, at this point in time, they would not be deemed responsive for these particular RFAs. And without belaboring the points that are listed here, they're also, this is verbatim from what is listed in each of the RFAs. If you have specific questions, I'd ask you to reach out to your NIH program directors to help you better decipher what these bullets mean. So the takeaway really is that there's something for everyone in tobacco regulatory science, whether it be product, the actual user, or the population as a whole. So I encourage you to apply. We look forward to reading that research. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Now we will get into the nitty-gritty of these applications from the NIDA training director, Michelle Rankin.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And so I'm going to walk you through a few nuances of these career development activity codes. And so some of the information might be rather basic for some of you who are adept at the NIH grant process, but if not, I hope that there's at least enough information for all of you to understand what we hope to gain from these requests for applications. So I wanted to highlight the point that there are different types of funding opportunities that the NIH releases, and this is a particular type of funding opportunity. It's called a request for application, and because of that, it follows non-traditional due dates. And what's really important that Dr. Beatty was
Honorary doctor.
Okay, Amy was highlighting is that you really have to pay attention to the science that is being solicited. Requests for applications are targeted to certain scientific areas. And so to be responsive to this, meaning that to develop a competitive application, you have to adhere to the science that this group of requests for applications are asking for. And also that the due dates are a little different than the standard due dates that are going to be found on the NIH grants funding page. So let's talk a little bit about the KO1 activity. This is a career development award. It's meant to provide support and protected time to allow you to continue your training and conduct research so that you can transition to an independent research position. And so this particular activity can be used for people that had to take a hiatus from research for childbirth, that kind of reason, or perhaps you want to transition slightly your skill set. So there's not a, if you're a postdoctoral person or a junior faculty member, there's no time limit for how long you have completed your terminal degree. It's just that you have to demonstrate a need to require further mentoring and career development. So in order to do this, you have to ensure that you can provide 75% professional effort to your research and career development activities that you propose in this application. You will have to match your research and career development plan to your specific needs and justify why you need this opportunity. And so depending on your career and research needs will determine how long you request support. You can request 3, 4, or 5 years of support. Now, as you're crafting your application, you have to ensure that you engage mentors that make sense, that are appropriate for your stage of professional, your career stage, as well as what your needs are. And the goal of this, again, is to help you transition into an independent research career. So it will be expected that towards the end, the last 2 years of this K01, you'll be applying for independent research funding, such as an R01. So the NIH Pathway to Independence Award, the K99R00, is a wonderful mechanism. It helps you transition from your postdoctoral position into an independent tenure-track faculty position. And so postdocs that are in their last 2 years of their program are eligible. This one does have a time limit. You cannot have you cannot have achieved 4 years of research training at the time of application or resubmission. And so when you're crafting your K99, it has to be apparent that you do need a little bit more training and mentoring to help you find your faculty job and wrap up your research so that you can be competitive to apply for an R01 once you transition to your independent position. So the K99, like I said, you have 1 to 2 years. Not necessarily everyone needs a full 2 years, but this is a wonderful way to protect your time and get dedicated guidance to help you find your independent faculty position. The R00 phase is it is an application that you can submit, and it's reviewed internally. It's not reviewed at CSR. It's reviewed at the institution that's supporting your K99. And in order to apply for the R00, you must have already been offered and accepted a tenure track or equivalent position. You have to have received a competitive startup package. You had to have made sufficient progress during your K99 phase, and so that it's clear that you will be competitive to launch your independent research program. And all of these, don't feel that you're out there on your own. Your assigned program officer, depending on the institute that your career development and research plans align with, that program officer will guide you through this. So it's really important during your K99 to maintain an effective relationship with your program officer, program director. So to compare these two career development opportunities, they're both meant to launch independent research careers. Their annual budget, salary-wise, is up to $90,000. It depends on the institution where you are currently studying. And each of these activity codes provides up to $60,000 a year in research expenses, tuition, travel, support costs. The R00 is different. This is after you transition for the K99, and that would be $249,000 of total cost. The project period, again, is a little different. The K01 can be anywhere from 3, 4, or 5 years. The K99 is restricted to 2 years total. You don't have to have 2 years. 1 year is fine. Your R00 support is up to 3 years. Everybody takes the 3 years because it's a wonderful mechanism. It provides you with some money in addition to your startup package, and it helps you to craft your competitive R01 in an area where your new institution, you'll be provided faculty, junior faculty mentors that help you navigate the tenure process as well as securing research funding. Neither one of these awards are renewable, and they cannot be, foreign institutions are not eligible. So just to, remind everyone that you as an individual are not the applicant, your institution. You would be the principal investigator on these. And both of the K01 and the K99 portion require mentors. And I'm really going to stress that it's very important to select the proper mentor for your career development and research goals. One other thing that I wanted to highlight is that these are career development plans. So for those of you who may help if you're a trainee or if you're a graduate, postdoctoral trainee, and you're helping your mentor, they're probably applying for our grants. And if you'll notice that research grants Three of the areas, innovation, significance, and approach, are focused on the research component. Whereas in the career development, please notice that only one of the 5 scored criteria are focused on the research component. That means that you cannot shortchange the effort that you put into writing a clearly planned out, clearly defined, and well-justified career development plan. What are your goals? Who is going to help you? Your mentoring team. Why did you select them? You can have collaborators. They're all going to have to write letters of support detailing how they're going to guide you along this pathway, and if they are providing either clinical cohorts or research agents, that should be clearly defined in your letters of support that belong in your application. It's also really important to explain why you're performing your career development training at a specific institution. Perhaps there's a unique clinical cohort there. Maybe there's unique research facilities there that will help launch your independent career. So all of these have to be discussed. And I did want to highlight this because recently the NIH has launched enhanced efforts to steward their clinical trials investment. And so as you have noticed, that each of these career development opportunities have been released in 2 separate versions. Either your research program is proposing to, you as the PI will lead an independent clinical trial, or you will perform research that is not a clinical trial. And I urge you not to assume you understand that definition. Please make sure that you follow the 4 questions. I've copied them here for you. If you can answer yes to these 4 questions, then your study is a clinical trial, and you will have to apply to the RFA that requires clinical trials. There are some nuances. Notice the sentence that I included. Studies intended solely to refine measures are not considered clinical trials. Studies that involve secondary research with biological specimens or health information are not clinical trials. And I offer on this slide resources to help you make that decision. There is an interactive decision tool located at that URL. It will walk you through these 4 questions, and it'll also provide you with some ancillary information to help you decide. The case studies and the FAQs, notice that I've listed here, these are invaluable to helping you with this decision. But again, if you still feel that you would like to discuss your decision, please reach out to the program officer listed at the end of each RFA, and they'll be happy to guide you through this decision process. One thing I did want to highlight, in case there are people on the phone that are not, or on the webinar that are not used to applying for NIH grants, is there's a very strict timeline here. So letters of intent are requested so that you can reach out to program staff and gain guidance on whether your proposed research is responsive to the RFA. The application due dates are firm. There's no wiggle room here. So the first one is due July 19th, next month. So there'll be an additional due date in 2018, November 8th. So notice that for the letters of intent for the July 19th, technically they should have already been in, but there might be some wiggle room. So if you're planning on the November 8th application date, please have your letter of intent in 60 days prior. Now, although these are not required for you to submit an application, they're highly encouraged because they help you to ensure that you're being responsive to the solicitation, and they also are a wonderful tool for the scientific review officer who will be leading your review to ensure that they have the appropriate expertise on their panel. So the scientific merit review for applications received July 19th, 2018 will occur in October of this year. So you see there's been, it's August, September, October, 3 months, okay? And then after that scientific review summary statements will be released 30 days after that. So that's 4 months, right? And then it's going to come up to for consideration for selection for funding in January's council. So the reason I'm highlighting that is because if perchance your July 19th application was not selected for funding, you do have the capacity to resubmit your application, but the next realistic date for you to meet would be July 19th, 2019. So this is just for your timing. So a few tips for success. These are things that we at the National Institute on Drug Abuse commonly guide applicants in, and they're really important. This cannot be stressed enough. Please read the instructions in the request for applications, the K01 or the K99 version that you're applying to. They're very detailed, and they can impact whether your application is deemed responsive or not. So make sure that you comply with everything that you're asked to do. Address all areas of your application, not only the 5 areas that are going to be scored criteria, but there are other criteria, biohazard, responsible conduct of research, and other items that you have to ensure that you cover in your application. And again, NIH staff, program officers, and scientific review officers, depending on whether you submitted the application or not, are happy to answer your questions. I've provided a link on how to craft or guide you in selecting whether you're asking for letters of support or letter of recommendation and reference. Please make sure in your bio sketches that your My Bibliography link is accessible, because reviewers get extremely frustrated when they can't access your publication record. And then for those of you that may consider submitting post-application materials, there's a specified due date, and there are particular types of materials that you're allowed to submit, and this notice describes them. And again, I wanted to, one last slide, and I really wanted to highlight the Tobacco Regulatory Science Program webpage. For all the information that I was highlighting, I put call outs where you can look to find what the research priorities are that are already listed in the RFA, but they're there. It shows you the request for application links, and this website is wonderful. They've already provided a list of frequently asked questions. So these are constantly updated, so you can visit them at any time. There is a comparison to help you decide whether the K01 or K99 R00 is more appropriate to you. And I also pointed out the research priorities section on this website, because remember, you need to propose research that is unique. So if NIH and FDA are already funding this research, your application will not be considered competitive. So please make sure that you spend time learning what this program is already supporting. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Michelle. That was really helpful. I know people often struggle with trying to decide which mechanism to pursue, and I want to echo what you said about not feeling free to call the NIH. I know sometimes applicants find this intimidating, but actually, you know, we're here to answer your questions as part of our job. And I just want to point out one other thing that's a little bit different in this funding opportunity, in that there are contacts for each of the institutes. There are 2 contacts as opposed to 1. And there's a person who's identified to answer your questions about scientific aims, but then there's also another person who can answer your questions more about the career award mechanism. And so depending on your question, you may want to call one person or the other. So now we're going to turn it over to Dr. Wijaya Nee, who is from the Center for Scientific Review. And so now that you know how to submit your application, this is what's going to happen in terms of the review of it. Dr. Neal?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, everybody. My name is Wei-Zhen Yi. I'm the Chief of Risk Prevention and Health Behavior Integrated Review Group at the Center for Scientific Review. As you heard, that usually RFA applications are reviewed in the institutes, but this particular RFA group is going to be reviewed in Center for Scientific Review, most probably in my in the integrated review group that I oversee. So Michelle did a very good job explaining to you all these RFAs, so I don't have to go into the detail about the clinical trial. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, I want to concentrate on the review criteria. First of all, the applications applying for these 4 RFAs will be reviewed in the special emphasis panel. Some of you may not know what is a special emphasis panel, short for SEP. That is, we form this panel specifically for these applications. So your applications are not going to be reviewed in the regular standard study sections. So these are the reviewers we'll recruit who are experts in, hopefully, in tobacco regulatory science. And then we're looking at all these K career awards. And for the overall impact, that's the main review criterion that we are looking at. That is, reviewers will provide the assessment of the likelihood that the proposed career development and research plan will enhance the candidate's potential for a productive, independent scientific research career in a health-related field. In this case, is tobacco regulatory science, and also taking into consideration the criteria, 5 criteria below that we are talking about, 5 specific criteria and some general additional criteria. So the first criteria is candidate. So we are asking, does the candidate have the potential to develop as an independent and productive researcher? And then we look at the letter of reference and other documents. Now, if you go to the RFA itself, in the review criteria section, you'll see some more specific criteria bullet points. I'm here just highlighting something. For the clinical trial applications, if your application is designated as clinical trial, which are responding to the 006 and 008 RFAs, then there are additional review criteria. So for candidate, it is if proposed, means if clinical trials are proposed, does the candidate have the potential to organize, manage, and implement this proposed clinical trial, feasibility, and ancillary study? Does the candidate have training or plans to receive training in data management and statistics, including those relevant to clinical trials? So remember, if it's a clinical trial, then we have additional review criteria. The second main criterion is career development plan. So what is the likelihood the plan will contribute substantially to the scientific development of the candidate, leading to scientific independence? So these are the questions we have been asking, and if it's a clinical trial, then we'll be asking, we'll be looking at, will the clinical trial experience contribute to the applicant's research career development? So from here, this is the second scored criteria. I want to emphasize that career development plan is very closely related to research plan, which is the next scored criteria. That's research plan. So we are looking at, are the proposed research question design and methodology of significant scientific and technical merit? Does the project address an important issue or critical barrier in the field? Is there a strong scientific premise for the proposed project? Is there evidence of a rigorous study design? And there are other questions. So, and if clinical trials are proposed, will the clinical trial experience contribute to the research project? So this is the as I was saying, it's very closely related to the career development plan because you are developing your career based on a research plan. So please pay special attention to these two because we've reviewed case in the past and we are seeing that that's a critical issue that you need to be very clear about the research plan and how that will help you develop your career. Now, this one more thing I want to talk about is the premise and rigor. These are some new things that came up at NIH and review in recent past year or two. So a lot of applicants were confused about what is scientific premise. In NIH term, scientific premise is the scientific foundation. It is not the hypothesis. It is not what you will be doing, but this is what theoretical basis you are building your research plan on, and what are the previous studies and what are the prior studies, whether they are data, whether they are theory, that help you build your research plan. So scientific premise is very important, and then rigor is more transparent. That is, we need a rigorous study design. And if you have a clinical trial, then of course there are more specific design plans that you need to include. For instance, your recruitment plan, your statistic analysis plan, your dissemination plan. All these things are actually in your application package you should take a look at because those are the things that reviewers are taking a closer look at them. Okay, this is the third scored criterion. And the fourth is the mentor, collaborators, etc. So this is very important. In K applications, your mentor is actually the same as you as applicants. We consider you both applicants. So mentors are very important. So you certainly want to have the mentors, the collaborators have research qualification in the area of proposed research. And if it's a clinical trial, we want to see if your mentor has the experience in clinical trial, okay? And they have the ability to guide you through participation in the clinical trial, okay? So that's important. That's the fourth scored criterion. And last one is the environment and institutional commitment. So that's about your resources, facilities, and training opportunities offered to you by your institute. And clinical trials, certainly, the addition is whether your institute will provide all these support for clinical trials. So these are the 5 scored, individually scored, what we call criteria scored, criterion. Then we have some additional review criteria. These are not individually scored, but they are considered in the overall scientific, overall impact score. These include all these 5 points. Of course, if it is applicable. For instance, we are adding the timeline. If it's a clinical trials study, then you need to indicate very clearly what your timeline for the studies are. And then protections of human subjects is very important, and inclusion of women, minority, and children. And if you have any vertebrate animals, how are they going to protect it and euthanized, and all that information that needs to be properly included, and we review them, and biohazards. So these are criterions, these are scorable issues that the evaluation will be included in your overall impact score. In addition to that, we have some non-scoring considerations. Now, here are some things that we are not scoring you on, but we are looking at them. That is, training in the responsible conduct of research. This is required for all the K applicants. And then select agent research, resource sharing plans, and budget, and period of support. So these are the sections we are also reviewing, as I said, but we are, the reviewers are not supposed to put these into the consideration when they score you, when they give you the scores. Okay, so what are the scores then? I'm going to talk about scores on the next slide, but here I just want to give you a general idea. I already mentioned your applications will be reviewed by a special emphasis panel, and the panel will be recruiting specific expertise, and we'll be excluding conflicts. And so anybody that you are collaborating with cannot review applications, obviously. And then, so these are the conflicts. There are other kinds of conflicts that we manage in peer review. And most reviews are from outside of the government, and we have a limit of how many federal employees or federal reviewers we can put on the panel. That's not to exceed 25%. And standard NIH review procedure will be used. That's the study section, what we call meetings. Every application will be assigned to 3 or more reviewers to do detailed review, and then all the applicants, whether you get a score or not, whether you're discussed or not, will receive your feedback in the form of a summary statement. Okay. So impact and priority scores. That's the score we're talking about. As most of you must know, the NIH score applications by using a 1 to 9 scale. So 1 is the best score, and 9 is the worst score. So 1, 2, 3 are considered high impact. 4, 5, 6 are considered medium, moderate impact. And then scores of 7, 8, and 9 are considered low impact. So as I was saying that we are assigning applications to 3 reviews to a detailed review, and then these applications will be discussed in the panel, and all the panel members, whether they are assigned to applications or not, will be scoring your applications after the discussion. And then these scores will be averaged and then divided by 10, and you will get a final score in the range of 10 to 90, 10 being the best overall scores. I want to point out that NIH review is that we only discuss the top 50% of the applications. The top 50% based on the preliminary scores. If you are on the better half of all the applications reviewed in a meeting, then they will be discussed and you'll get specific priority score. For the applications that are not discussed, you will not get the final priority score. You'll get an indication of ND, which is not discussed. However, you will still get the criteria score from each assigned reviewer, and you will get your summary statement. Okay? This is all I have to say, and if you have any questions, you can ask me in the Q&A session. And if you have additional questions about the review process, you can contact me with email and phone call. Thank you very much.
Thank you, A.G. That was very helpful. So now for the last presentation, before we open it up to questions, we'll be hearing from Amy Bunkheimer on the administrative and budgetary requirements. If you're lucky enough to be worrying about this, I'll turn it over to Amy.
Hello, good morning. I'm going to keep my presentation quite brief because Michelle Rankin did a fabulous job of covering the letter of intent and the due dates and that type of thing. I have individual slides to address each different funding announcement. The first of which simply discusses what the funding announcement says in terms of how many career award applications they intend, CTP rather, intends to fund. As I said, the next several slides simply address the due dates for the letters of intent, the application due dates, the earliest start dates, and they are all the same. I simply wanted to give you separate slides so you had a quick point of reference. I'll kind of forward through those quickly. This next slide addresses project periods. For the K01 awards, it looks like they're going to be 5 years and no more, as is typical for grants. The K99 ROO awards, it looks like the K99 phase would be 1 to 2 year project periods, followed up by a 3-year project period for the RRO phase when you transition into the independent scientist phase. The next slide addresses PI eligibility and appointments. For the K01 awards, for both of them, the PI must have a full-time appointment at the applicant institution. Intramural candidates are not eligible for these. However, they are eligible for the K99 ROO awards. And again, the PI applying to the K99 ROO awards must have a full-time appointment at the applicant institution. The next slide addresses allowable costs. And again, this is reiterating what Michelle Rankin already touched upon. Salary up to $90,000 plus fringe. Research support costs typically up to about $60,000. F&A costs are always 8%. For the K99 ROO awards, the major stipulation there would be the ROO independence phase. It may not exceed $249,000 annually, and that includes salary, fringe, research support allowance, and applicable 8% F&A. Post-award information for both these types of awards. The mid-period progress reporting, as is due for all FDA-funded awards, we require these are due every 6 months during each budget period. So one mid-period progress report would be due per budget period. And all FDA-funded awards are excluded from carryover authority. So you would simply need to seek prior approval for any unobligated funds that you wish to carry over. I definitely flew through those. I wanted to keep it brief so that any questions you all have, I could be here to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Amy. So now we will open it up for questions, and I will read the question out loud, and we will do our best to answer them. So the first question, seems like it's probably directed to Michelle. The K01 RFA states a plan should be presented to assist the candidate in preparing an application for independent research support in the 3rd year of the award. Is this restricted to year 3? Is there flexibility to move preparing an NIH R01 in years 4 and 5 instead? Yes, there is. So generally, I like to say the last 2 years, because if you're only getting a 3-year support on a K01, it'll be year 2 and 3 for you. But if you're receiving 5 years, 4 and 5. Again, I would like to highlight that the grant avenue is really competitive these days, so it's best to plan to have to resubmit. So the earlier you begin that process, the better for you. Okay, the next question. Okay, the non-responsive topics include short-term studies, sometimes specified as 90 days or less. Are these scientific topics of interest and responsiveness? The study course is more than 90 days.
Yeah, because then it would not be considered short-term.
Okay, next question. K01, is there a limit on how long an applicant has been a junior faculty? Is there a limit on how long an applicant has been a junior faculty?
For a K01, no. K99, you cannot have, so obviously the K99, you cannot be an independent researcher. Now, having said that, We do understand that people with clinical training have different titles. So in the RFA, there are situations that are explained what would allow you to be eligible for either award. So again, for a K-99, you cannot have received more than 4 years of research training. For the K-01, there's not a time limit.
And there's another part to this question, how are junior faculty defined?
So generally, those are people who have not secured independent research funding, such as an R01. They're not a PI on a P01 or P50. They're not a PI on a sub-project of a P50. In the RFA, there are very clearly defined restrictions that tell you whether you've achieved research independence or not. And so if you've already received an independent K award, meaning a K01, K02, or even if you're ineligible for these.
And one other related question, are staff scientists eligible to apply for K01?
So the criteria are any PI that has the skills necessary to conduct the research. And as Amy was describing, you have to have a committed position at the institution, and you have to be fully authorized to conduct the research that you propose.
Okay. The next question is about the K-99. NIH policies state that an applicant is ineligible even if he/she applied, not received an R01. Is it the case for this K-99 RFA?
If you received an R01, you're not eligible for a K-99.
But they're saying, I think the question is if you applied and didn't receive an R01.
So it only accounts the awards that you actually received.
So, yeah, so if you haven't received it, even if you applied, if you haven't received it, then you're still eligible. Okay, are there more questions? No? Okay, well, we'll wait a couple of minutes. Again, if you have a question, please put it, type it into your chat box, and we'll read it out loud for the benefit of everyone who's participating, and we'll try to answer your questions. So I'm going to leave it open for another couple of minutes. Well, I guess our presenters did such a wonderful job. They preempted most of the questions.
I just want to clarify about the 90-day research to be considered short-term or long-term. Also, they can contact the scientific program officer. I mean, they can contact the scientific. Again, I just want to clarify about, just adding a comment about the question whether something is considered a short-term or long-term study. I would also highly recommend for you to contact the program officer so that you can ask any specific questions about that, because I think it also depends on the type of research and your research questions. So I think we highly recommend that if you have further questions about that, just contact the program officer in the RFA. Thank you.
All right, we have another question. Is it okay to have a mentor on your committee with whom you've had previous relationships? This is typically discouraged in K awards, but since a tobacco regulatory science expert is required, is this okay?
So usually, like Dr. Nee was describing, that your career mentors and collaborators have to be clearly justified for why they're there. And again, the purpose of this award is to launch your independent career. So as long as you can demonstrate that this collaboration is not impacting your ability to launch your independent career and is clearly justified by your research and career development plan, then it should be acceptable, but perhaps Dr. Nee would like to comment further.
Yeah, the mentor question, as I said, mentor is part of the applicant team, and it has to be well justified, and we certainly will review the mentor also. It's part of our review of the candidate. Mentor is one scored criterion, and then we'll look at whether the mentor is appropriate, whether it has clinical trial experience, if it's clinical trial. So I don't know what specific questions you're asking. If I read the question clearly, I'm reading the chat, that you're saying that somebody says the mentor should not be in the same field. Is that the question?
I think the question, they were concerned that if they already have an established relationship with a person, would that impact the review committee's assessment that they're actually going to grow and advance into research independence? There are some.
I think the most important question is whether this mentor is appropriate to mentor the career award. So whether they have an established relationship or not in the past, we are, in the review area, that might be one consideration, but not the whole. The whole is whether the mentor is appropriate. It has the expertise, and they have worked out a mentor-mentee in a relationship that can help the mentee to reach independence. So that's the important things we're looking at.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is, when it says 6 to 10 projects to be funded per RFA, does that mean 6 to 10 over the 4 cycles, or per cycle, or per fiscal year? It's per fiscal year. Okay, next question. That's a repeat. The RFAs state late applications will be accepted for this funding opportunity announcement, but RFA 005 does not say this. Is that a typo? Should it say not? If it's not a typo, how should we interpret that? I'm guessing it's a typo, but I think we're bound now to what's published there. Although I guess it's the question is about,
Can I say a few words about that?
Yes.
Hello? Yeah. So I was looking at that too. I was a little bit confused. I think this language doesn't mean that the applicants can submit applications late. This is the same type of language that we have in all the FOAs. That is, CSR does have a late submission policy if the applicant can provide a reason, such as participating in the study section reviews, and then they may be able to submit applications late. There is a specific notice for that.
Right.
So I would not. Right.
Yeah, I agree. We allow it in cases of, if there's a hurricane or, some extenuating circumstance. It doesn't mean that we will accept, late applications because you just couldn't get it together before the due date. The due dates are pretty strict, so you have to have a very good excuse to submit a late application. The reason that's in there is that it allows for extenuating circumstances. If it said that if they're not allowed, it wouldn't matter whether it was a hurricane or whatever. If you didn't make the deadline, you didn't make the deadline. So I hope that's clear. Plan on submitting early, not late.
I want to add one thing. I was a referral officer for almost 10 years. So I would encourage applicants to submit early. You don't have to submit on the deadline. And the benefit of submit early is, let's say you submit a week early or 5 days early, then you can look at because after you submit, you can actually look at what's submitted. There are sometimes glitches and problems and things like that. And then if it's not deadline yet, you can actually resubmit it. You can withdraw what you submit as a wrong application and resubmit it before the deadline. If you submit on a deadline and something happens, if you found the error, then CSR is not going to let you resubmit at all. So please be very careful about those.
Okay, our next question is, what information would you like to have included in the LOI? So one thing that's important if you're thinking about your research for this specific program, since it is bound by the regulatory authorities of the FDA, we like to review specific aims, if you have them, to make sure that you're not out of scope in terms of FDA authorities. And then we also like to have the information that is included in the RFA, so the title of the study, and any additional information you may want to provide in terms of your qualifications and your mentors. Again, to repeat what Michelle mentioned, the letter of intent is not required, and you won't be in trouble for not submitting it. It really is an opportunity, though, for you to get some feedback from us to make sure you're focused on the right track here before you actually submit the application. Okay. Another question. I think this was on a slide, but can you please clarify when you would hear about your score and when the earliest start date for the November submission? So I believe the score you get 30 days. Well, that's the summary statement, but the score. Can you?
Yeah. So let me talk about scores, because the starting date was on a slide of Michelle. So I'll let Michelle talk about that. But for the scores, we are releasing the final scores 3 business days, within 3 business days after the study section meeting. So you will see the scores, and then within 30 days after the meeting, you will receive the summary statement. All of them will be in your Commons account. And you will get an email informing you that's available. Okay?
And answering the question about the earliest start date for the November submission, answering the question regarding the earliest start date for the November submission, that would be July 2019.
Okay, next question. Does NRT, such as nicotine patches, fall under the definition of tobacco products?
No, it does not. That falls under another center's regulatory authority at FDA, and that's under CDER, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. And I would direct questions to them. And if you have specific questions about research on NRT, Tris can help direct those comments through FDA as needed.
Thank you. Next question. Does the mentor need to have experience of securing big grants such as R01?
Generally, mentors have that, because as Dr. Nee was describing, mentors clearly, the individual mentor, the entire mentoring team needs to demonstrate that they have not only the scientific knowledge, but the professional knowledge to guide you to research independence. And so in order to do that, generally, they have significant funding. The crafting a suitable mentoring team is really important to ensure that you can become a competitive independent researcher. So I'm sure that if you want to talk about your specific situation, please do reach out to the program contacts, the scientific contacts at the end of the RFA.
Okay, that looks like it may be the last question. I'll keep it open again for another couple of minutes to see if there are any additional clarifying questions. Okay, it looks like we're at the end of our webinar. Oh, there's another. Okay, sorry. Spoke too soon. We just got another question. So for the K-99, how many mentors are needed on the application, and what does co-mentoring mean?
So there's one primary mentor. You can have a mentoring team. And generally, there's not a specific number, but I really haven't seen more than 3. Like, there's a primary mentor, and then you can have a couple of co-mentors. So what these generally do is offer specific expertise that are needed to launch your independent career and provide you with the knowledge that you're lacking. And there are also usually additionally collaborators that will provide either research, supplies, ingredients, expertise, something that's sole source. So again, this is something that in your particular situation, you need to be thinking about what is it that you're missing that you need to gain to launch your independent career, and who are the people that you need to achieve that next level in your career.
Okay, I'll leave it open for another few minutes. See if anyone has some last thoughts or questions. Again, the slides and the webinar will be posted on the TRIS website. I expect sometime next week. You can refer back to everything that was said here today. And again, we encourage you to get in touch with the contacts listed in the FOAs. They are there to help you, and I'm sure if they don't know the answer, they will make sure they find out. So we hope that you found this helpful, and we look forward to seeing your application. I think that concludes the webinar.